Hi, boys and girls. I'm so happy to see you again. So the name of our book today is called Wallace's List, and it is by Barbara Bottner and Gerald Kruglik, illustrated by Olaf Landstrom. So have you ever made a list? Have you ever written a list down? What kind of list did you make? And so here's Wallace right here on our cover. So what do you notice about Wallace in this picture? What do you notice about him? And so Wallace thinks that he can't do anything unless it's on one of his lists. All right. So can you see any problems with that? What might happen? So then he meets his new neighbor named Albert. So we're going to find out what happens when he meets Albert. So Wallace's list. Here we go. Wallace, a mouse, could do almost anything. Anything, that is, as long as he had a list. He kept a list of all the clothes in his closet. That way he could get dressed in the dark and everything would match. Wallace had lists of pets he would like, stories he loved, and exciting weather such as thunderstorms, hailstorms, and blizzards. When Wallace woke up, he wrote a to-do list. This morning it read, water plants, take a walk. Wallace watered his plants. Then he rang for the elevator. Hello, my name is Albert, announced Wallace's new neighbor. Wallace would have liked to say, hello, my name is Wallace. But saying hello was not on his list. Wallace wondered what Albert was like. So Wallace, who's our main character right here, our little mouse, he only does things on his list. So what do you think about that so far? Do you think this is a good way to live or maybe not? What do you think? The next to-do list Wallace wrote said, say hello to Albert and laundry. So Wallace introduced himself to his neighbor. Would you like to listen to some music? Asked Albert. I have to do my laundry, Wallace explained. Laundry is laundry, said Albert, but music is life. Wallace thought of Albert as he watched his clothes tumble around in the washing machine. When Albert called out, I'm off to paint some ducks, Wallace wished painting was on his list. Late that afternoon, Wallace saw Albert's painting in the hallway. Something had gone wrong. Wallace knocked on his door. Where are the ducks? I changed my mind, Albert boasted. Wallace was dumbfounded. Changing my mind is an adventure, Albert exclaimed. I don't like adventures, said Wallace. An adventure can be anything that isn't planned for. You mean anything that isn't on a list? Asked Wallace. Exactly, said Albert. Do you ever use a map? Wallace continued. I have lots of maps. I don't need maps, said Albert, because wherever I go, there I am. But what if you get lost? Being lost is automatically an adventure, cried Albert. Suppose you got lost and then fall down and hurt yourself. I pick myself up and keep going, replied Albert. When I get in an accident, it makes me feel better to write a list, said Wallace. Wallace showed Albert list number 3, accidents that happened to me. Number 1, bumped my nose while vacuuming. Number 2, scraped my knee, same day as bumped my nose. And number 3, stubbed my toe. Excellent, said Albert. Perhaps you would like to join me sometime. If I ever did go somewhere, said Wallace, it would be to a place from list number 7. Places with funny names. Kathmandu, Mali, Timbuktu, Walla Walla, or Glacamora. Glacamora? How about Tamara? Cried Albert. That's pretty funny. So, would you go on an adventure with Albert? What do you think? Do you think it'd be fun? And what do you think? Why is it what's keeping Wallace from going on an adventure with Albert? To be fair, explained Wallace, there is one more list you should know about. Number 8, things I hate. Number 1, rain streaming down my glasses. Number 2, sand in my shoe. Number 3, being hot. 4, being cold. 5, being wet. And especially 6, being lost. It is quite possible that at least one of those things might happen if you went to Glockamora, Albert admitted. Wallace agreed to think about it anyway. That night, the idea of an adventure made Wallace so nervous he couldn't sleep. When he finally dozed off, it was dawn. So why can't Wallace sleep? Why can't he sleep? Wallace awoke to the sound of rain plinking on his window. He thought that on such a dreary day, he might like to share some nice onion soup with Albert. He looked at his recipe. Onion soup. 3 onions, 2 cups of water, dab of butter, pinch of flour, dash of pepper. Wallace only had 2 onions. Perhaps Albert had one to spare. On his friend's door, he saw a note. I knocked, but you didn't answer. Maybe you don't want to have an adventure after all. I'm off to Glockamora on my plane, the Rapid Rodent. Wallace watched the sky grow darker and heard the rumbling get louder. A major storm was heading their way. Torrents of water fell from the sky. Wallace had to warn Albert about the dangerous storm. Wallace had to make his way to the airport before his friend took off. He unfolded his map and waited for the bus. Before he knew it, he was drenched. His glasses steamed with water. His map was soggy. If this was an adventure, he sincerely hoped he'd never have one again. At the airport, the arrivals and departures board was the biggest list Wallace had ever seen, and it was changing right in front of his eyes. He would have enjoyed just standing there and watching it flicker, but first, he had to find Albert. He raced from terminal to terminal. He got caught on a baggage belt and tumbled around with the suitcases. In Terminal 3, he was chased by a cat. Wallace rushed outside and a bus splashed water on him. Wallace decided to go back inside and climb up to the observation deck where he could see almost everything. So what is happening to Wallace at the airport? Is he having a very good experience? No planes were taking off or landing, so perhaps his friend was safe. Then he noticed a sad-looking fellow, Albert. Wallace was thrilled that his friend was safe. He told Albert how his map got soggy, how he didn't have his rain goggles, and how he was bumped around on the luggage belt and chased by a cat. Wallace, you had a real adventure, Albert exclaimed. But he didn't say much more since his own adventure on the Rapid Rodent had been canceled. Wallace remembered a list he read in the newspaper. How to cheer up your pals. 1. Listen to them. 2. Buy them chocolate. 3. Tickle their whiskers. But Albert was not heartened by these remedies. Wallace had one more idea. He took Albert to the baggage claim. They held on to each other and rode around the conveyor belt until they were dizzy. They hopped onto a fancy piece of luggage that was loaded onto a trolley and led outside, where it was then heaved into a huge limousine. They watched the city lights whiz by. When the limousine stopped at a giant building on Park Avenue, Wallace whispered, "Let's go inside." So, are you surprised by what Wallace says here? Let's go inside. Does that sound like the same Wallace that was at the beginning of the book? Wallace and Albert rode the elevator to the 30th floor, stepped onto the balcony, and gazed down on the whole city. "We are almost as high as my plane," said Albert. "I can see just as far, and it's not bumpy." "Thank you, Wallace." "I wish I had a steaming bowl of onion soup," said Albert when they arrived home. Wallace was just about to tell Albert he needed 3 onions to make proper soup when he decided instead just to chop the 2 onions he had and put them in water. Then he sprinkled in some sugar, even though it wasn't the recipe. As the soup simmered, Albert found Wallace's list, number 11. Funny words: rhinoceros, hippopotamus, kayak. "How about Cincinnati?" Albert suggested. "My Aunt Hattie lives in Cincinnati," said Wallace. "Do you really have an Aunt Hattie?" "Of course not," laughed Wallace. Telling jokes had never been on any of Wallace's lists. Onion soup with only 2 onions was delicious. When Albert went home, Wallace made a new list. My adventures: going to the airport in the rain, getting lost, being chased by a cat, rolling around on the conveyor belt, riding in a limousine, being on a Park Avenue balcony, making onion soup with only 2 onions, telling a joke. It was a long list, the longest list Wallace had ever written, but it was not nearly as good as list number 14. My best friend, Albert. That was his favorite list ever. The end. So that was wonderful. Wallace's list. Okay, that was by Barbara Bottner and Gerald Kruglik, illustrated by Olaf Landstrom. So I hope you enjoyed that book about friends as much as I did. And again, I look forward to seeing you next time. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe day. Love you. Miss you.